Hi, this is Ed Amoroso, and I welcome you to our discussion today. We're going to really dig into a topic that's been on my mind. I think it's one that's been on a lot of your minds. It's this narrative threat problem that's emerging online with deep fakes and misinformation, disinformation. I've got my friend Wasim here who runs Blackbird. I know a lot of you know Blackbird.AI. It's a cool company, becoming more and more and more prominent. And I thought it's time to have an expert share with us, how do we deal with this problem? It comes up so much. Wasim, thanks for making time. I appreciate you jumping on. We're gonna want to deep dive this with you, and you're my guru on this. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thank you so much for saying so, and really happy to be here today to talk about this.
This narrative attack thing, it's something that I think it's like a new threat vector, right? That emphasis on new. It seems like, execs and orgs, it's just coming up so much. What give me a little sense of the evolution here, because it's rare that we see a new vector. But what's the story here?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, just for a little context, we've been watching the evolution since about 2017 when we first started looking at this problem. A lot of people think about this as disinformation or influence campaigns, and the way we break it down is we think about these as narrative attacks. And so, if we think about the evolution of narrative attacks, what's really happened is they've gone from these isolated influence campaigns to much more sophisticated, coordinated tradecraft that has been co-opted by a whole number of nation state actors and domestic actors to shift perception. So you could think of this almost as a cyber attack on human perception. And again, the evolution has been that it's turned into a full blown AI automated tradecraft that has become much more effective and much more lower cost than what we saw in years past. So, what we call the information warfare kill chain has really become this non-linear approach that has become very effective and on par with like a traditional cybersecurity kill chain. And the other thing I would add is, as it's evolved, unlike a traditional cyber kill chain that looks at, let's say, physical networks, we are talking about here the information warfare kill chain working across multiple communication platforms, so social media platforms, things of that nature. And they're using things like generative AI, produced copy, deepfakes, other types of synthetic media. They're using things like bot networks to create all types of confusion and erosion of trust. And they do that often in a vacuum, information warfare space, but often they do it before, during, and after a traditional cyber attack to exacerbate the impact. So that's just kind of how it's evolved. It's become much more organized, and of course, it's become Gen AI powered as well.
One thing I've asked you before, and I just want to make sure I've got it, like around who really needs to prioritize this. You could probably make the case that a lot of different groups would be dealing with this problem. Like I could imagine the lawyers wanting to do that. I imagine the executives or even at the board level. But it seems like, and tell me if I got this right, it's mostly been CISOs and security teams that I've been given the responsibility, and I presume authority. Do I have that right? Because at TAG we're mostly a cyber audience, so we're kind of
Mhm.
talking to cybersecurity folks here. Is that who you're finding for the most part? Is calling you about the platform, testing it, and deploying it, or is it other groups?
Particularly in the last year, there's been a massive upswing in CISOs and particularly threat intelligence teams under the CISO. When we first started, it was really more national security. So think like DODs or MODs and whatnot that were looking at influence campaigns. And then the 2021, 2022, we saw a lot of Fortune 500, Global 2000 companies that were looking at risk and reputation. But as the tradecraft evolved, and then as our technology that we're utilizing evolved as well, it really started becoming more of a threat intelligence problem. And as that occurred, we saw more and more CISOs inbounding us. And then, so today, yes, this is a threat intelligence is a key buyer, but there are also particular verticals that have needed it more than others. So think like if we think about our customer base, we're looking at banking, telecom, pharmaceutical, anybody who's providing a product in the consumer products space, right? So there's a supply chain, ingredients, things of that nature. And then if you look at things like the semiconductor industry, we have interest there because any kind of geopolitical risk that occurs, of which there's no shortage of, then blows back on any number of organizations based on the positions they take, the things that they say, and where they're doing business. And so ultimately, this has become such a high level of risk. It has been the threat intelligence teams, but the other reason to really drive home is it's the same type of actor that is perpetrating these attacks. Sometimes they are like literally swivel chair in the same room. If it's like a nation state actor, their traditional cyber attacks and their information operations attacks are left and right hand. And so it makes perfect sense, frankly, that it's going to land in the CISO's lap to begin with, because that's happened for decades, right? Like the problem isn't their problem until it becomes their problem. Say digital fraud management or KYC. Ultimately, it's going to end up in the CISO's hand. Why? Because when nation states are spending billions of dollars perfecting a tradecraft, it's not going to be left to say, the comms person or the marketing person, right? That's not where this particular tradecraft lies around narrative attacks and narrative intelligence. So yeah, massive uptick, and we've had some really, really great integration with threat intelligence teams. So you can think of like this sitting next to like the recorded future solution next to our Constellation platform to understand narrative intelligence, cyber intelligence in the same environment.
It's so rare that we actually see something new, and like integrating this into that sort of cyber defense life cycle is kind of interesting. So the word attack, I guess, is the big hint that we're dealing with security folks. You've told me a little bit about kill chain and how like there's this new kill chain. Maybe you could share a little bit about that. I love how you explain that. You might even have a couple of charts you can pull up to show us that picture. I think they're very helpful.
Yeah, sure. Let me do that. I will actually start by pulling up a chart around this kind of information warfare kill chain that we did back in 2021, since we're talking about evolution, so we can show you what it looked like then, and then what it looks like today. And there's been quite a change actually. All right.
Information warfare kill chain. That looks scary already.
Yeah. So again, this was back in 2021, and is what really we were seeing there. So if we start here on the left side, so it's you have reconnaissance, the threat actor, and what we always think about this as, these actors are very opportunistic in nature. So they're going to look for something in the social space, in the news space, that creates the kind of impact that they want. Remember, it doesn't always have to be a threat actor creating the story that they want to drive. It doesn't have to be disinformation to begin with. It can be a piece of a story that they latch onto, and then you go from that kind of finding the cracks, getting that opportunistic act, to then build on that by weaponizing that piece of information in any number of ways. Perhaps you want to put a deepfake alongside it. Perhaps you want to recontextualize what happened into something else that's going to rile people up. And then you launch the campaign and you seed the information ecosystem with it. You start to amplify it by copying it and using, say, bot networks to then amplify it further. You watch that thing grow, and then you make sure that you manipulate that environment to go to certain groups that maybe you're going to be even more enraged or engaged by that content. And then ultimately, you fulfill your objective and have that final effect, whatever it might be. Maybe it's to tank a particular stock, right? Maybe it's to create a massive reputational hit on behalf of like a competitor that's hired you from another country, things of that nature. So that's that kill chain that we saw and really started utilizing back in 2021. However, if you fast forward to today, especially because the tradecraft has gotten so much more sophisticated, and we realized that we had to move past something that was just a basic framework, and then people have to unpack it all. So we ended up building a TTP framework, so techniques, tactics, procedures of the threat actor and of the nature of a narrative attack or narrative kill chain, as we call it. So what we wanted to do here, if you look at across the top, you have your essentially your techniques. So think about things like targeting, network development, deception, dissemination, amplifications. You see some similarities from the old kill chain, but we really only had this top column once upon a time, right? But now we can actually map, using technology, map the techniques and the actual procedures of the actor. So what the green means is that within this part of the kill chain, the targeting component, these are the actual techniques that they're utilizing. So in that targeting column, you're seeing the exploitation of echo chambers. You're seeing the leveraging of social, economic, or cultural vulnerabilities and tensions, right? So that's what we're seeing lighting up in this particular narrative. Whatever a narrative might be, just one narrative in a large data set or activity that's occurring, an incident, these are the ones that are lighting up here. And we don't have to go through all of this, but you just say under deception, okay, we've got that recontextualizing of events that I talked about a moment ago, so misrepresentation. Then over here, mobilization, let's say, calls for violence, important one. We've got a lot of executive protection narrative intelligence customers post United Health, really. And so seeing these kind of calls for violence light up that are trying to mobilize people for a call to action become really, really important. So this is what that looks like conceptually. But I do want to take it one step further, because what our customers really want, so they're looking, everybody's looking for automation and AI enablement, and how can a system do the work for me? So, it's not enough for us to put, say, our intelligence agents on our platform and then have them go do this work for people, which was kind of what we were doing in the middle. Now, the next evolution of our product, the Constellation platform, you can actually see a TTP framework. So this is actually our dashboard. And what we always wanted to do here is, how do we generate that TTP framework in a way that you can utilize it to build recommendations and playbooks? So now it's the same thing. We're no longer in a PowerPoint, but we're seeing all of those techniques across the top. And then now you have a massive number of techniques and procedures. So if I just want to single some of these out, let's say creating dichotomies, right? Or calling to join a movement, leveraging vulnerabilities, or calls to legal action, calls for a protest, right? So now, if you click on one of these green checks, then what you'll be able to see is AI generated synopsis of what that particular procedure actually represents within the data set, right? So language used, such as weapons of mass destruction, references to chlorine munitions, is strategically chosen to evoke fear and distrust towards Ukraine and NATO in this particular narrative, which is that Ukraine used chemical weapons in Kursk. I just give this as an example because that TTP framework is generated and the techniques and procedures are put in front of you. And if you were to dig into this further, you could dig into the actors, you could dig into the network graph, all of the things that our platform typically does. But here, I just wanted to demonstrate that being able to look at the TTPs in this kind of a framework, and this is just another view of the same thing, being able to see how severe each one of those TTPs are and what's actually happening within it is actually very, very useful to our customers and partners.
Is it hard to keep this up as you see new techniques and tactics pop up? How are you guys maintaining the framework?
I think one, just this is all we eat, sleep, and breathe, and have been essentially for the past 10 years. So every time we see one, our platform has been built in such a way that it's very rapid. This constantly growing list of techniques, tactics, procedures, and some of these often end up getting bucketed just for particular customers as well, if it's very, very specific. But yeah, it's an ever-growing list. So much like all of the professionals in cybersecurity, we all know that it's part of it is a whack-a-mole cat and mouse game. So there's always evolution, right? And so there will always be a growing list, and that's part of the benefit people get from us is we're on top of it.
This structured approach obviously reminds you of MITRE, right? MITRE has with the attack. I mean, even visually, it reminds you of that concept. It just screams dealing with nation state threat actors, right? Am I exaggerating to think that are nation states behind some of these things? Like, tell me about the threat actors, because in the past, you and I might have, or you know more about this than I'll ever know my whole life, but I would always think of these things as more mischievous, but they seem more malicious now than mischievous. And malicious makes me think kind of a serious threat actor, including nation state. What are you guys seeing? Does it rise to that level?
So it absolutely does. And what we're seeing also, and this is also has been researched extensively by other parties in government, is that we're talking about billion plus dollars in spend perfecting this tradecraft at the nation state level, right? And that's people and technology now. So for sure they're building that and constantly seizing upon, if you look at that left side of the kill chain where it's about finding the cracks, right? Whether that's in a incident that occurs that you find the cracks in and blow it all up, they're constantly looking for these things to weaken and erode institutions, governments, norms, communities. How do you find those fractures and how do you split them apart? Because we are all self-subscribed to the information ecosystems that they have access to do this kind of work, right? And so, absolutely, if we're talking about nation states, all we need to look at the biggest geopolitical events that are occurring right now. There's just, in fact, a New York Times article even that I saw yesterday around the completely new nature of psychological warfare. With the recent geopolitical conflicts and wars that are occurring. But to us, it's nothing new. It's been happening steadily for like 2000, since 2015, 16, that tradecraft. And so I think people are taking well note that the things that they see right now online are so warped and manipulated they can't really tell what is happening or not. And then the people who can't tell the difference, that cyber attack on human perception, which is what it's all about, actually takes hold. So another way to say this is that like nation states are specifically exploiting and leveraging platforms that everybody's on in the way you think about like zero trust. So instead of exploiting code, they're exploiting human perception and they're driving impact in that manner. And they use every tool at their disposal. So synthetic amplification bots, deepfakes, to create often the illusion of organic grassroots movements, or real humans caring about real things to shift the population in a particular direction, nudge them in a particular direction, right?
Yeah.
And that is, it's all about manipulating public opinion and sowing discord and achieving at the end of that, not just for chaos or mischief, to achieve a strategic objective against everyday citizens, against companies, against institutions. So it is definitely not mischief. It is strategic and it's a long game as well. It might not be something that they're doing just for this week. They might be looking at a 5 to 10 year horizon and they're chipping away at that final strategic objective over time. And this is the easiest way to do it. It's also the lowest cost way to do it compared to an actual cyber attack or breach.
Let's get real practical now, because I'm spent my life, dealing with cyber threats in real time. If I'm if I'm talking to you, some security guy talking to you and your team about deploying this thing, I can see how from a forensic perspective there'd be some interesting thing, definitely from a learning and awareness perspective. But now if I'm just out there in the field and I want to be able to predict stuff and look for signals, or I don't know what you would call it, indicators maybe, or signals or something. What are, like, how would that whole thing work? Do you talk to customers who say, "Hey, dude, I want to deploy this and use it to stop stuff as opposed to analyze it after it did happen"? How can you predict this stuff, or can you predict it? I honestly don't know.
There are predictive patterns for sure in terms of like looking at narratives and thinking about or knowing, are they likely to explode or trend or not. But I think from a cybersecurity perspective, probably the strongest thing we have is like customer feedback and customer signal, CISOs and threat intelligence teams that have used it, and often they find ways to use the platform, in maybe even ways that we wouldn't have thought about because they're so in it in their particular environment. But we have heard from our customer, a customer that is quite under attack by every nation state possible because of the work that they do. They have every possible tool. They have really, really great analysts, work heavily with the federal government. but they were actually able to thwart, detect actual cyber attacks, and with our platform, seeing signals that they had not seen on
Oh,
any other platform. And
mm,
the cost attached to that, I mean, I think everyone has a different way of assessing what each cyber attack would have cost the company in time, money, attention. But it was like a no-brainer for them to continue entrenchment because they started seeing things of that nature. That same company actually also said they used our platform to prevent a physical infrastructure attack. Um, and that was really interesting. And we have another customer who we were able to see and understand for a particular event that their CEO was going to drive, that there was going to be a disruption there. And they were able to see that and understand that, and be ready for it. So that's the kind of thing that people are getting out of the product as an end result, let's say. But if we're talking about with the kinds of signals, well, I think traditionally, the type of content, the kind of data we're talking about here, CISOs and cybersecurity professionals kind of felt like they weren't really interested in that data. Let's call it like, social chatter and things of that nature. Like how does it affect their cybersecurity posture or safety posture, things of that nature. Um, and yet they're still looking at places like dark web. It's the same thing, but just kind of low res mentions on deep and dark web. So I guess if I was really speaking to them in terms of signal and operational ability, we have dark and deep web. We combine that with things that are shifting the public opinion, that can drive insider attacks, that can drive physical infrastructure, attacks on your executive teams. And those are all things that I would imagine threat intel teams are pretty concerned about. You also have a whole host of other things related to narrative that you could look at, to see risk signals. And the way to really think about this is these are additional signals that are high risk that can be integrated into the work that you're already doing to not only warn you when your posture needs to change, whether that means escalating from orange to red for your executive team because of something that's happening in the sector or the industry. You get a leg up on those kinds of things that you wouldn't be able to see if you're just focused on your network infrastructure, or your traditional data sources. And because what's happening in the narrative space is fluid, it's dynamic, and it has to be processed quickly and brought to you just in time. And that's what we can actually do here. It's not just about forensics, but it's about understanding how the global chatter around incidents that are happening in the world can create outsized risk for the organization or the people that you've kind of sworn to protect.
I mean, that cadence of detecting signals, external in this case primarily, and processing them, generating some sort of insight into what's going on, and then taking action. I mean, that's threat intel. I mean, that's so you guys really are. It's like this is a new branch of threat intelligence for the security team. Like, do you find yourself? I think you'd mentioned a lot of threat intel teams do come to you guys. Is it a comfortable sort of deployment for them where they drop your platform in and it becomes part of their ecosystem? It feels like that would be very comfortable, but I'm just curious what is that how it works?
You know, in a perfect world, that is how it would work, and you get there with people eventually. I think initially, it's like anything else that's new. You have a champion that's clearly understanding that this is a problem, and they bring it into that team.
Yeah.
Maybe some of that team has some resistance to it and whatnot. What we've seen is those teams, once they start actually utilizing it, all it does is help them. And for for CISOs, where that threat intelligence is rolling up to, I think one of the really interesting things about this is, and I've heard this from meeting hundreds of CISOs over the last several years now, is that CISOs want a bigger seat at the boardroom with the CEO, with the executive team. Which, frankly, when I got into this business, which I'm new to this business, I had no idea that they didn't already have a very powerful seat at the table because it's just common sense, right? But what we empower them to do now is the kind of analysis that you can do with narrative intelligence are the kind of things that CEOs and boardrooms and shareholders are actively thinking about. So for any CISO that's ever gone in and said like, hey, we thwarted these, 150, attempts and whatnot, and people just kind of said cool and sent them on their way without realizing the gravity of it, right? Here you're saying, well, okay, well, this particular narrative attack that would have impacted our stock price by, say, 25% because of a thing the CEO said in this meeting, we were able to neutralize that, detect and neutralize that. Or this person who was going to do a physical attack on an executive at this particular keynote, we were able to detect and understand that.
Mm.
Or being able to look across your entire industry and see where you stack up in there from a public opinion perspective. These things become what we've seen part of the board pack, right? We're talking about like looking at narrative intelligence to understand the posture of the company across risks and opportunities on everything that's happening on the planet today, geopolitical, internal, satisfaction of like employees and whatnot, your sector risk, right? Um, and all of those get folded into, hey, let's look at what happened and let's look at what might happen going forward. And so this becomes something that's very compelling for a threat intelligence CISO team to come in and say, this is a business function that ultimately lets people make, and this is the most important part, you're coming to them now with something that helps you make strategic enterprise decisions about the future of the business, right? And traditionally, it's all been about like, what did we prevent from happening, or what actually happened that was a potential breach. But here, what we're talking about, public opinion and perception leading to physical attacks, financial damage, reputation, it's something that essentially is what problems or what CEOs, what they're kept up at night by, right? Um, we've even heard discussions around how if you don't have the right kind of narrative intelligence for executive protection, as an example, you're going to have the shareholders and the board all down your throat because you didn't actually protect that asset, i.e., your CEO or your 10 most important people in the company. And so we're enabling that as well. So I think it's very important that threat intel teams and the CISOs that then give them the budget to do these things understand that that's the kind of thing that we can enable, right? It is not media monitoring or listening from 15 years ago. This is totally different. This is narrative attacks, narrative intelligence, and it's about also mining for risk and opportunity in a way that was really never foreseen until we put this kind of technology in play.
It's funny, while you're going through the discussion around risk and maybe more executive level, I'm doing a risk assessment right now for a healthcare industry client. And reputation has come up a bunch of times, and duh on me. I'm just listing out the risk, but as a control, this is a control for that. That's an interesting, like I hadn't really thought about what you guys are doing as a risk control. But in those, like when you're doing your 10K or something, you're laying out what the reputational risk.
You
That's
did
what
jump
I
ahead of
should start putting that in there. I guess other people watching should start putting.
100%. So, look, this is a great forum to talk about this then. So, specifically around the 10Ks, right? So, one of the things we've actually started doing is we've just started mining 10Ks for, their outsized risk. And as it turns out, we can often directly mitigate for some of those risks
Yeah.
that, typically wouldn't be the purview of really anyone in the company, right? Like they've identified the risk, but everyone almost saying, there's that risk. Now let's all wait and watch and make sure we're ready to do something once that actually occurs. But nobody's got like their hands on it. So, we're talking about a financial institution right now, and this is the thing we started doing recently. Actually, is really looking at those 10Ks because now it's like, well, you guys stated this to your board like 3 months ago, so there's got to be some budget for this somewhere, that you can come up with because we've solved for this, right? So I love that you went there because that's been on in particular on.
If you ever wonder who writes those things, I'm an example of somebody who helps write this. It's funny, you have to put a different kind of cap on,
Mhm.
because well, you and I are both kind of, tech nerds, but when you're thinking more at a business level, it's still different. The risks are different than when you're sitting in a security operations center, but you guys straddle both of those. So
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Hey, let's close with you giving everybody some advice. There's a bunch of people watching here. Like if they want to do, like, is there a meaningful POC, or do they just sign up and get rolling? How do you normally, when a client says, or a customer business or something says, hey, dude, this is awesome. Let's do something.
Yeah.
You turn it on. How would somebody get started?
Yeah, I mean, the screen I showed you before, it's an in-browser
Yeah.
SaaS analytics dashboard. We're also building out an API for that could be integrated into SOC and tip environments. That's coming soon. But today, what people are doing is they're just firing up that platform. There's some training we provide. I mean, for threat intelligence in cyber, it's like, immediately off and running, unlike some other industries. Yeah, and then they're often detecting these kinds of harmful narratives, correlating them to the things that they really care about from a risk perspective. That's how we get deployed. Like we could deploy like in 24, 48 hours, because there's nothing on-prem and things of that nature. Right? I guess the other thing I would say is like from a recommendation perspective, if you're on a threat intelligence team today, and you're trying to understand the essentially the constellation of risks that might be out there that affect your day to day, and you can't really see like when there's a threat actor, an adversary, or a nation state, especially one that has an axe to grind against your organization,
Yeah.
your CEO or something. If you can't see the way they're building narratives, if you can't see the way they're building them up, or deploying technology like bot networks and things of that nature to get people riled up, to create a groundswell of even more vitriol towards your organization or your executives. And then you can't see when these kind of hyper agenda driven groups, dangerous ones that they are targeting, start getting even more riled up. That's where you end up seeing some of the really bad things that have happened to people and companies in the past couple of years. And people think they're getting sideswiped, but they're really lacking observability on something that could have been avoided or mitigated if they were able to see those signals.
Yeah.
The disadvantage that these threat actors have in using these systems that we're all self-subscribed to is they're not done in the dark, right? This is publicly available stuff if you know how to mine for the tradecraft, right? And so that is the weakness that we can also exploit against those adversaries. And the easiest way to think about this is night vision, right? So if there's an adversary out there that's trying to sneak up on you and they're trying to do harm, and they don't know that you have that night vision, they're at a real disadvantage, right? And so that is really what we're providing. Observability that threat actors don't know others have. It's one of the interesting things about being new to the market here is a lot of these guys don't know that you can see what they're doing. That enables, going back to what we're talking about on enterprise strategy, it gives you technical dominance, it gives you decision dominance, it gives you strategic decision-making capability at the CEO level, at the board level, and of course at the CISO and threat intel team level. So I would just say the recommendation, if you don't have something like this, you're kind of a sitting duck for adversaries that have built this tradecraft.
Well, Wasim, I feel about 10 times smarter on this topic. I hope people watching feel smarter too. I mean, this is, it's cool stuff. It's nice seeing something unfold, a new kind of cybersecurity unfold in front of us, because there's so much same that goes on in our industry that I find it exciting when there's something new. So hope a bunch of people watching right now give you a yell. You have to let me know. You get
Absolutely.
you get busy. Business looks good. Keep up what you're doing. It's good for our industry that you guys are busy. That's good to.
I appreciate that. Really appreciate it. And this is a very mission-oriented company. We got a full house all the time here. We like working with one another, and most importantly, we like helping our customers. So we're here to help. So yeah, look forward to people reaching out. Yeah.
We've done enough talking. You go back to work.
All right. Okay. Thanks a lot, Ed. Really appreciate it.
For everyone else watching, we'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching.